We heard from the proponents yesterday, and so we'll have with the opponent, Deputy Secretary Henning from the Department of Environment. Are you here today? Yes, he is. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. Again, my name is Leo Henning. I'm the Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And I am here to provide testimony opposing House Bill 2340. I have provided you written testimony, and I hope you read it. It will outline our concerns with the bill. Before I get into the actual testimony, I do want to provide a little bit of background about the facility that we're talking about. Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant was built for the World War II effort to produce explosives and rocket propellants for World War II. It was a chemical manufacturing facility. It manufactured nitrocellulose, nitroguanidine, nitroglycerin. The production at the plant was discontinued sometime during the Vietnam War. The facility was issued a Resource Conservation Recovery Act, that is that federal law, RCRA, that you heard about yesterday, by EPA in 1991. These permits are issued to facilities that used and stored large quantities of hazardous waste and will need cleanup actions at the facility. This facility has 120 separate contaminated areas at the facility, and the Army has been and continues to clean up the facility. In 2005, Sunflower Redevelopment, which I'll say is SRL in the future, made an agreement with the Army to take over ownership and cleanup operations at the site and assumed all, and I want to emphasize all, the environmental liability at the site that the Army did not clean up. In the deal, they received 9,000 acres in Johnson County. They received $109 million to clean up the facility. The Army paid for 2 environmental insurance policies to cover cost overruns and unknown contaminated areas. SRL voluntarily entered into a consent agreement with KDHE to clean up the site to residential standards per, at that time, the Johnson County Master Plan. And the agreement included cleaning up the entire facility, including pesticides, lead-based paint, and asbestos. I have provided the committee a copy of the consent agreement. I don't expect you to read it all, but on the other hand, if you do want to read the consent agreement, it is very clear that all pesticides were included in the cleanup order. So, after taking over the cleanup activities at the site, it became apparent to SRL that the $109 million was not going to clean up the site. So the Army had to return and continue cleaning up the site when SRL could no longer clean it up. This bill that we're talking about addresses the pesticides portion of the cleanup. KDHE and SRL agreed to a standard remedy for pesticides in 2010, and for a while SRL was cleaning up the pesticides. And I think that's an important thing that everyone should understand. When they had the $109 million, they were addressing the pesticides around the buildings. It's only after they ran out of money that they decided that they will no longer address the pesticides around those buildings. But the second part of this is the insurance policies that the Army paid for. SRL made a claim to their insurance policy for the asbestos, lead-based paint, and pesticides. In 2018, they received $24 million for cleaning up those 3 constituents as part of their insurance claim. Not all the contaminants at the site, specifically for pesticides, lead-based paint, and asbestos. So I would like to call the committee's attention to attachment 2 in your package, and I will like to go through that with you, and I'll give you time to pull it out. Huh? Okay, so they do not have a copy? Okay. We did bring copies for the committee. They were submitted on time, but we were just wanting to make sure that everyone follows along with this discussion. Yes, this is the one. Oh, we'll get to 3 in a second. The consent order. Right. And that's a fairly large document, and I don't know if you truly even want to read it, but if you do, it's available. So what you have in front of you is a letter from Sunflower Redevelopment to, yes, this one here. Sunflower Redevelopment to our senior attorney, Kate Gleason. And I will call your attention to the second paragraph that's highlighted, where Sunflower acknowledges that they did receive the $24 million from their insurance claim. The next paragraph down, the first sentence, is what I would love for the committee to read, which is, this letter will confirm that SRL is committed to using the insurance proceeds to complete remediation of applied pesticides where the land is used for residential development. So this is a commitment, again, from SRL. They committed once in the consent order to clean up the site, including the pesticides. In this letter, after the insurance proceeds, they again committed to KDHE to clean up the pesticides applied around the building. And I would like you to go to page 2 of this letter, and I did not highlight it, but the first sentence of the 5th paragraph, I'll read it out loud if you don't have it, but it says, while SRL may not agree with the Army's position that RCRA does not mandate certain actions at the site, nonetheless, SRL intends to use the insurance proceeds to demolish buildings, remediate applied pesticides where the land is used for residential development, abate asbestos on buildings, and remove lead-based paint around those buildings to the extent necessary to protect human health. So again, what I want to point out here is that we have numerous opportunities and occasions where SRL has promised the state that they will clean up the pesticides. So SRL issued the letter to KDHE stating it would clean up the pesticides on September 3rd, 2019, and that was the letter we just went through. SRL has recently stated that it will cost about $20 million to clean up those pesticides. Therefore, SRL has received an insurance claim more than enough to cover the cleanup of the pesticides. So next, as time has moved on, SRL asked if we would consider a human health risk assessment, which is a perfectly legal and approved method of evaluating risk at a site. And that health risk was submitted to us in November 22nd of 1922. And KDHE made an evaluation of that risk assessment and provided a letter back to SRL, and that letter back to SRL is attachment 3. So if you want to pull that out, I'll be glad to go over that with you.
Sorry, what page, or where are you at on?
On attachment 3 now,
Okay.
and it looks like this.
Thank you.
Okay, we're all right. This letter was sent to SRL on April 28th of 1923. And I want to go to the first highlighted area where KDHE has said back to SRL, based on the review of the HHRA Human Health Risk Assessment and response to our comments, KDHE finds the results conclusive that the area can be used for non-residential use, industrial standards. You don't have to clean up the pesticides if the property is used for industrial standards. What you heard yesterday was that SRL did not know that they could use this for industrial till just last week. I don't know how that could be when they received a letter in 23 that told them that they could use it for industrial standards. Flipping that to the second page, the very top line, KDHE knows that the HHRA and incremental sampling method work plan does not support the use of residential properties. I paraphrased it. So what we said in this next paragraph is that if it's going to be a residential property, you're going to have to clean up the pesticides. If you go to the bottom of that paragraph, or that page where we highlighted it again, we brought back the presumptive remedy that we had agreed to with SRL, saying that you need to, if it's going to be a residential property, you need to clean them up, and we can still use the presumptive remedy to do that with. And then the last point I would want to point out on this attachment is the highlight on the third page, where we document, and I'll read this one. In the meeting with KDHE, SRL has described its plans to initially use some of Sunflower Army ammunition plant properties for commercial and industrial use. Then resell or reuse the same properties for residential use. I know that we've heard that this is all going to be industrial. And maybe today, or this week, it is all industrial. But the long-term plans that SRL has always told KDHE is that there will be a mixture of industrial, commercial, and residential on this property. So in that lies some of the questions as to if it is an industrial property, they don't have to clean up the pesticides. It's only when it turns to residential that we need to make sure that we aren't leaving toxic material behind in a residential setting. So this property right now, it has been annexed by the city of DeSoto. It used to be in Johnson County. The city has incorporated into their property limits. Currently, the property that SRL is zoned for what is called RUR, and that stands for Rural Residential. It's not zoned for commercial. It's not zoned for industrial. The only property out there that's zoned is the property that Panasonic bought. Everything else can be residential. I don't think it will be. I'll add that. But I don't know what's going to be residential and what's going to be industrial. So I want to talk a little bit about the pesticides that we're talking about. So the pesticides that are at the facility, the four main ones are dieldrin, aldrin, heptachlor, and chloridane. These are highly toxic chemicals and have been banned in the U.S. from use since the 1980s. And that's because of their toxicity to humans and because of their persistence in the environment. They last a long, long, long time. These chemicals are neurotoxins and are probable carcinogens. Concentrations of aldrin, which was the most used at the facility, consistently ranges between that 50 to 100 times residential standards. And as noted, there are some very high concentrations above that out there. So, KDHE's missions. What is KDHE charted to do for this state? KDHE's mission is to protect human health, protect our citizens from hazardous chemicals. That is why we are here. These chemicals are hazardous to human health. KDHE could not allow these soils to be used in a residential setting. Residential standards means the soils are clean and there will be no ill effects, health effects from encountering these soils. Residential areas include areas for childcare, schools, playgrounds, parks, and residential homes. KDHE is also concerned that the bill prohibits institutional controls in these areas. New landowners or developers in the future could buy this property, develop it where these chemicals have been left behind, and they would not even know that these chemicals are there without an institutional control that goes with the property through many turns of property sales. We have a program in KDHE that would call the Environmental Use Control Program that would put a notice on this property that says, if you use this property for industrial uses, it's fine. But if you change it, or if you choose, future landowners choose to turn that property into a residential setting, you have to deal with it. And that runs with the deed. So there won't be any surprises in the future by future landowners. Okay. This bill also sets an unprecedented policy. It allows entities with other contaminants introduce a bill at the Senate House, or in the House here, relieving them of liability for cleaning up their contamination at other sites across the state. Kansas has always wanted entities that caused the contamination or took responsibility for cleaning up that contamination to follow through on their promises and clean up the sites. This bill relieves SRL from fulfilling its promise to clean up the facility, and it puts future landowners and developers and residents at risk. I would ask the committee, why would we do this? We have a developer that has promised the state to clean up all pesticides at the facility. We have a developer that received $24 million to address the pesticides at this facility. Why would we not have that developer follow through with what they have promised us? So, to that end, I want to answer a couple things that came up yesterday during the testimony. There was a discussion yesterday that SRL was merely a contractor for the Army, that they were only doing the Army's work. And I would suggest to this committee that if you're merely a contractor for the Army, you wouldn't have entered into a consent agreement with the state promising to clean it up from industrial residential standards. I would also suggest that if you were just a contractor for the Army, you would not have received the 9,000 acres of property in Johnson County. And I would also suggest that if you're merely a contractor for the Army, you would not be listed on the RCRA permit for the facility. The consent order is as it's written. It does cover all pesticides at the facility, not just those that were spilled, not those that were used around the mixing area, but all pesticides. If we were going to carve out the pesticides around the buildings, we would have put that in the consent order. It would be specifically outlined in the consent order that this would not apply to pesticides applied around the building. It is not. The intent of KDHE was and is to address all the pesticides. I personally negotiated that consent order. SRL knew exactly what it meant. So the idea that they didn't understand is not believable. And again, I just want to point out, while SRL had the money, they were cleaning up these sites. So it's a new idea that they didn't know and that they don't have to. So with that, I will close by saying this is not a good idea. I suggest that this bill not be passed by this committee. I would suggest that this sets terrible precedents, and I think we should have a responsible party or a person that has taken responsibility for these contaminants to clean them up. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Thank you. I got a couple questions myself before we open it up to the committee's questions. First of all, the concern, I think, from your concern has been if this property is changed to residential, it needs to be cleaned up. I have developed property myself, and if I went in there and bought 40 acres and agreed to clean up that 40 acres, is that all that would be required for the residential within that 40 acres?
Yes, if you own 40 acres and you want to convert it from an industrial property to a residential property, which is the same for any property around the state, you would not take a chemical manufacturing facility that's highly contaminated and then just start building homes on it. So
my question
okay.
is, that 40 acres is all that would be required to, if I had to get a permit to do that. I wouldn't have to clean up the other 9,000 acres.
No, it would only be if you're owning 40 acres and that's all you own, that would be all that you would be responsible to clean up.
Okay. And then we do have an agreement, do we not, with Sunflower, that if this property is left as is, industrial, if it's used for industrial, no further cleanup is necessary. Is that correct?
That is correct. If it is industrial, we have said that the HHRA, the Human Health Risk Assessment, shows that the risk is acceptable and it can be used for industrial purposes without additional cleanup.
Commercial and/or industrial, is that
Yeah,
right?
the term I should use is non-residential, but when you start saying non-residential and residential, it gets confusing, so.
My last question, for zoning, and you say it's all RU or R?
Right. It's currently zoned outside of the Panasonic area, which is now zoned by the city as industrial. The rest of the property out there is zoned RUR, which stands for residential, rural residential.
Would it not be true that when you bring any piece of property into a city, they bring it in as the lowest denomination, if you want to call it that? They're not going to bring it in as a commercial. They're going to bring it in as a rural residential, and then you can rezone it at present.
Right, and I fully expect the city of DeSoto will ultimately zone these properties according to their use. I'm just saying that right now, it is not
Not industrial property.
Yeah, it is. It is not zoned that way. Yes, correctly.
I will open up to the committee. Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Secretary Henning. Very thorough. Yeah, so I was reading the overview of the bill, and I have some curiosity questions. So it specifically calls out non-residential property restrictions throughout the overview of the bill, and then it's for any property that would be deemed non-residential. It feels like the intent of this is to specifically call out non-residential properties. I'm curious why, do you see it that way, or do you see it a different way from what this bill is intended to do?
So I'll get it, if you want me to go to that detail, I definitely will. But where I am coming from and on this whole discussion is that we have a entity that has promised to clean up the pesticides. They signed an order with us. They said they would do it. Second, they've sent us a letter after they got the insurance money that says that we're going to clean it up. I do not understand why this committee would not now allow or require or not pass this bill so that they live up to their promises. Now, I will continue. When the bill was initially drafted before the amendments, it was totally unacceptable to KDHE. It relieved SRL from all requirements regarding soil, groundwater, and it didn't have the fact that if in the future it becomes residential, that there's no requirement to clean it up. Matter of fact, the way the bill was initially set, it says that the developer or owner of the property has no liability, period. And so that was unacceptable, so an amendment was added. Does that answer your question?
It does. One follow-up, please.
Okay.
Thank you. So it feels like how it is sitting today still holds them accountable at the point they would convert to residential. You also have a remedy in the sense that you talked about being able to put something on a deed, which I thought was an interesting point you made as well. So they feel, how I read this, I still feel like we are holding them accountable, that if it does convert, they are liable at that point in time.
Someone will be. Now, the part is that institutional controls are stricken out of that bill. So there would be no deed notice on this property to let future landowners know that there's even pesticides left behind. And that's one of our largest concerns, is that there should be something on the property that tells a future landowner 10 years, 40 years, 100 years from now that the pesticides are still there, and if they're going to make it a residential area, then it needs to be cleaned up to those standards.
And the last follow-up, do you feel like there is a additional amendment that would make that clear? Or do you feel like this is just something that you can't support?
Again, I would go to my top two. This is a terrible precedence to set, to allow a responsible party to come to the House here and be relieved of their responsibilities that they have committed to. I think it opens up the door for many additional responsible parties around the state to come in and ask for relief from cleaning up their sites. So at the highest level, I would say we do not support this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you remind me again, how long ago this started and up to what year? And then kind of following up from that, like what's the lifespan of these chemicals, these pesticides? I mean, you'd think sitting there all these years, it would break down, if you can speak to that.
So we believe most of these pesticides were applied back in the 40s, maybe several times thereafter. We don't have record of that. But the buildings were built in the 40s for World War II. They were wood frame buildings, and it would not surprise me if the Army did not apply the pesticides for those buildings as they were being built. I don't have that exact day as to when that occurred, but it's going to be probably sometime in the 40s. We have taken the information that's been provided to us by the Army and SRL to show that those chemicals are still there at many times the residential standards. The reason that these chemicals were good chemicals is that they are very persistent, and that's why they're banned in the United States now. They don't break down, and so they last for tens, decades, which they already have. Because if they were applied in the 40s and they're still there at these concentrations, they've been there for 80 years and they haven't broken down. So how long they'll last, I can't tell you, but they will last a long time.
Senator Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Leo, today for your testimony. So just to be clear, I want to clarify a little bit on what Senator Klemp asks for my first question. Typically, under RCRA, once you're a potentially responsible party, you're in that chain forever. So this is not my area of law necessarily, but if to be statutorily individually pulled out would be a departure from how RCRA has historically been applied. Is that a fair statement?
RCRA's a beast, okay? You can have properties taken off of the RCRA permit as they are cleaned up, in which we've done. An example is Panasonic. That was on the RCRA permit. It was cleaned up to residential standards. So we were able to take that piece of property off the RCRA permit. The permit can go away when everything is cleaned up.
The parties that are responsible, that chain usually isn't shortened until the permit goes away, was my quote.
Okay.
Is that?
So under RCRA, the people that are responsible for the contamination on that site is the owner and operator, the property owner and the operator of the facility. In this case, it would be SRL and the Army.
It seems in talking to both sides, the core issue about this really comes down to whether or not these pesticides are exempt from regulation under RCRA. We heard yesterday that Sunflower believes that RCRA, there's no federal authority to regulate cleanup of these pesticides. Can you talk about that or explain your position on that?
There's an exemption for properly applied pesticides. That definition was incorporated into RCRA in 1985, some 40 years after these pesticides were applied. There's no information that shows that these pesticides were applied properly. Because first, the definition didn't even exist back then. And I would agree with SRL's account that they provided yesterday, which is the sergeant told the corporal to go out and apply pesticides to the buildings. I don't think there was much other direction than that. So, so that is our take on the FIFRA and RCRA exemptions, is that it didn't even exist when these pesticides were put in. And at the concentrations that we're seeing now, still, we believe that they were over-applied, and so they're not properly applied.
If we were to pass this bill as written, it would essentially end your KDHE's ability to regulate this under the state authorities for hazardous waste and the delegated RCRA authority. There would still be the core permit, or sorry, the EPA permit that would exist. By removing KDHE from the chain, have we actually removed any of the developmental risk or the responsibility? Or I know you're not EPA, but what's still hanging out there if we pass this bill?
I can't speak for EPA, okay, because I'm not EPA. But in our discussions with EPA, they would see this bill as hindering our ability to implement RCRA at this facility. And they would have a couple options after that they could exercise. One, they could pull the permit back in and they would then regulate this facility totally. Or they have another mechanism which is called a 7,000 order, in which they can just order the developer to clean it up.
I know this would be a better question for your counsel who couldn't attend today, but when I look at the information from both sides here, it appears to me there are significant legal questions about what RCRA applies to that I've not had satisfactory answers from either side, to be honest. And we're looking to just make a legislative determination when what we really need are several judicial determinations about what's applicable here. So that's sort of the concern I have behind all of this, is that maybe the Senate Commerce Committee isn't judge, jury, and executioner on this order, but I think there's a lot of questions out there. Thank you.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to be brief because I know we're running out of time to get through the agenda today. So if KDHE has no concerns if it remains, so let me back up. I understand you feel like they've been paid to do the job, they should do it. Let's get rid of that idea and just, let's move past that. KDHE's concern is simply, it can be used as is for anything other than non-residential. And if they want to use it for residential, it has to be cleaned up. Can KDHE currently put the environmental control on the deed?
No.
Why can you not currently do that?
It's a voluntary program. The developer or owner of the property has to put it on themselves. But this bill strikes institutional controls, which is the EUC. And we are all talking about soils here, but what we have not even talked about is groundwater. Groundwater has not been even delineated yet. We don't know where the contamination is or isn't. So how do we deal with that when this bill says that KDHE cannot be involved in any of those discussions on groundwater contamination? And that's maybe a little bit oversimple, but it says that we can't direct, can't approve any of the groundwater work that needs to still be done. So who's going to do it then? Because it's all state agencies. So who in this state's going to do it? It only leaves one person, and that would be the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ware.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, you just said what was my question was, we're talking soil, 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 but gosh, it probably seeps through the soil into the groundwater. And it's too bad that we don't have that specific involved in here. But I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked yesterday. If you were on site with your grandkids, would you allow them to play in that dirt?
I will say that most of Sunflower is green space, which means nothing ever occurred on it. It is clean today, no problems. But I will say in the pesticide areas, I would not let my grandkids play in it.
Reichman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony today. We received a lot of, how I perceived it, a lot of different conflicting or at least adversarial testimony on both sides. And I have some concerns of passing a bill that will exempt something that was there. At the same token, I would like it. There's some way that both sides could get together and work something out, so this bill would not have to come to fruition. Do you see a way that both sides could get together and maybe say this is only going to be an industrial and not in the other aspect, and so we would not have to continue with this bill? Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes.
Other comments or questions? One more, just one more. This is coming from the House Committee on Commerce, and it was, it came from the, I think you submitted it, if I remember, maybe it doesn't have a signature on, so I don't know. It's item number 6 on here, and I'm going to read the comments, and it's residential use without restrictions. KDHE and SRL have already devised a working path forward for both residual soil and groundwater contamination at the site that would allow for commercial and industrial use of the property, allowing unrestricted use, which would include residential use, risk significant harm to the public based on the existing levels of contamination. On the contaminated soil has agreed that SRL that the pesticides can be left in place if the property use restriction ensuing there is not residential development. Is that still true?
Yes. It still gets to the fact that if this is going to be a non-residential industrial property, the pesticides can remain. If it's going to be turned into a residential area where we have homes and parks and schools and things like that, these present an unacceptable risk to those receptors.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the hearing. Thank you very much for being here. We have 20 minutes. We're going to go ahead with hearing on H3 43, and we'll have a briefing. Thank you. Yeah, H3 2343. On your committee, on your documents, that has been scratched. That one first line has been scratched. That's the incorrect description. So we'll get a description right here.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I didn't see what it said. Is the agenda title incorrect? House Bill number 2343, as amended by House Committee, would create the No Impact Home-Based Business Fairness Act to limit the regulatory power of municipalities relating to certain home-based businesses. Section 2 of the bill defines two types of businesses that are relevant to the act. One is called the no-impact home-based business, which means a home-based business for which the number of on-site employees and clients does not exceed the applicable residential municipal occupancy limit, and the business activities are limited to the sale of lawful goods and services. They do not generate on-street parking or substantially increase traffic. They occur inside the dwelling or inside the dwelling or within the private premises, and they are not visible from the street. The second definition is a rural, no-impact home-based business. This means a home-based business located outside the city boundaries or within private premises of more than 1 acre, and for which the business activities, again, are limited to the sale of lawful goods and services and occur inside the dwelling or within the property limits. Section 3 of the bill provides that the businesses defined that I just described shall be considered a permitted use, and that the permitted use shall supersede any deed restrictions or covenants restricting the use of the land, or any bylaw or other document applicable to a common interest ownership community that is entered into by such business on and after July 1st of 2025. Except that the permitted use shall not supersede bylaws of a homeowners association under certain circumstances that are provided in the bill. Section 4 provides that a municipality, which for purposes of this act is defined as a city, county, or a consolidated city and county, shall not prohibit such business or require registration, permits, licenses, variances, or other types of prior approval to operate such businesses. Section 5 permits a municipality to enforce narrowly tailored regulations for specific purposes, including protection of public health and safety, as limited by the bill, also for purposes of compliance with state and federal law and payment of taxes. Municipalities must address and differentiate the circumstances of a rural, no-impact home-based business, such as the size of the premises and proximity to neighbors, and shall favor less regulation for rural businesses. Section 6 prohibits no-impact home-based businesses from selling illegal drugs or liquor, engaging in adult-oriented businesses, or operating a structured sober living home for substance abuse recovery. Section 7 provides that a municipality shall not require such businesses to seek rezoning of the property for commercial use, install fire sprinklers for certain residential dwellings, or be subjected to fire or building inspections unless such inspections also apply to similar residences not operating such a business. Section 8 provides that whether a regulation complies with the act must be established by the municipality with clear and convincing evidence, and the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book. The bill passed the House on February 20th of 2025 on a vote of 74 to 49. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions, committee? Yes, Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amelia, on section 4, based on just, again, I'm just reading the overview. It says the municipality shall not prohibit such businesses or require registration or permits for any of these businesses. So, but what if it is a, let's say, a beauty salon that has to be licensed and has to carry a permit?
The provisions of this act apply to cities and counties, not the state.
So, just so that I'm understanding, if currently the city requires a license for a specific business, you name it, this would then, if they did it at their house and followed these rules, eliminate that requirement, even if they currently have a requirement.
I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer that right now. I think I'd have to think about it a little bit.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to try to see if I can
Okay.
get an example. A beauty shop. That would have to be in a, normally they would be in a commercially or zoned area. Would that be part of this?
It would seem to me that if it's the business itself that is being licensed versus a person being licensed to provide that, because this bill has to do with the business, I think it may prevent them from licensing for those locations.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Committee? Seeing none, we'll go to our proponents. Proponents, we are going to be tight on time, so please have your comments as brief as possible. The first one we have is Representative Turk. Are you here? Yes, there he is. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, committee. Chairman Alley, Vice Chair Owens, members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony for this Commerce and Economic Development Tool, the No Impact Home-Based Fairness Act. I come from House District 117.
Come on over, the water's fine.
It seems to be the trend, but I don't know if you can pull me in quite yet. The legislation, if enacted, will empower entrepreneurs and protect small business owners and ensure that home-based businesses can thrive in Kansas without undue regulatory burdens. As we discuss this issue today, there are dozens of local communities who regulate innovation out of existence. Kansas local regulations would currently prevent the next Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Harley-Davidson from being created. And this legislation not only provides an avenue for this innovation, but it also provides opportunities for those who are underemployed and needing additional resources. Now, you're going to hear a whole host of why it shouldn't, and I'm going to address some of those today. One, the example for which you just brought up. Can you name one that is only city licensed that isn't regulated by the state? Because I can't off the top of my head. Anything that's licensed by the state continues to be licensed by the state. This has no impact on that. If you can think of one, glad to hear it. That's only licensed by a city and no one else. A couple arguments that you're going to hear that this bill strips municipalities from the ability to protect public health and safety. It absolutely does not. It expressly preserves municipality authority and enforces narrowly tailored regulations to public health and safety as detailed in Section 5A. Municipalities may enforce a fire and building code, health and sanitation standards, and again, if you drive by the place and you can't tell that some business is going on inside of it, then that's what we're talking about here. If you can drive by and be like, oh, that's a salon, it has a sign out. We're not talking about that. That does not apply here. Another argument that you're going to hear, and I've got a whole host of them, so I will pick the ones that are most likely. This bill undermines local zoning and regulatory authority by preempting municipal permit requirements. No. It designates the use of residential dwelling for a no-impact home-based business as permitted use in Section 3, and this does not eliminate local regulatory oversight, but ensures that municipalities cannot impose additional permits, licensing, and rezoning requirements that go beyond what is narrowly tailored for public safety in compliance with state and federal laws, and that's in Section 4, 5, and 7. This bill may open the door to abuse. This bill explicitly limits the types of activities allowed. For example, Section 6 prohibits the use of home-based business for selling illegal drugs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a compromise bill that has been under construction for years, and it's frustrating when the same people that we work with to compromise with then come back and try and poke holes again without actually reading through the bill and answering all their questions in the language. It's a very short bill. There really shouldn't be that much objection over allowing our citizens to create business within their own home and provide themselves with a source of income. I just want to go through a couple of the cities.
If we could wrap it up, because we got 7 more.
I'm not as important as KDHE. That hurts real bad. Yeah, give me 10 seconds. Couple things. Leavenworth, limited to family members residing in the home, no more than 25% of or 1 floor, 400 square feet. Only one profession or occupation allowed. That's just one example. Prairie Village, no more than 20% of the floor area, limited to family members residing in the home. No on-site sales to general public. Limits customers, only one customer. Let's see, Junction City, no more than 25%. There are several cities and municipalities within that don't allow you to use your own garage. It's simply a matter of, can I use my house and provide myself an income? And I will stand for questions if you need it.
We'll have questions at the end. Thank you very much. The next one is Jennifer Freestone. Jennifer?
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Freestone. This is my husband, Larry Freestone. We own and operate Model Repair, a small engine repair service that we run in the evenings and on weekends out of our garage. We're here in support of HB 2343 because we've been adversely impacted by the City of Lenexa's home occupation license process and regulations. We moved to our home in November of 2023, and our home occupation license was denied by the city last fall. When we attempted to work with the city to address their concerns, we were informed that our only option was to file an appeal with the Board of Zoning Appeals. We paid the required $100 fee, submitted all requested documentation, and followed the city staff's advice to gather letters and signatures of support from our neighbors. A total of 27 emails were sent to the city expressing support for our business, and we collected 13 signatures from neighbors over 4 days. Despite these efforts, the city's staff report recommended that the Board of Zoning Appeals deny our appeal. During the board meeting, both we and city staff presented our case. After about an hour and a half of discussion, a board member inquired about whether we could reapply if the appeal was denied. The city confirmed that we could reapply, and ultimately the board decided to deny our application while allowing the opportunity to reapply for a home occupation license. Following this decision, we met with the city staff to ascertain what additional information would be needed for our new application. At the city's request, we submitted a written business plan and again paid the $36 application fee. On January 27, 2025, the city granted us a temporary home occupation license valid through March 31st, 2025, with the stipulation that we install screening around the trailer parked on the gravel pad beside our home. We were instructed to obtain a permit for this screening to ensure compliance with city code and collection of fees. The city plans to conduct site visits around March 31st to verify that adequate screening has been installed or that the trailer has been removed. If these conditions are met, our home occupation license will be extended through January 2026, at which point we will need to reapply. Our concerns center on the financial and logistical burdens this process places on our family. The required screening, along with the possibility of additional future expectations, creates significant stress. On multiple occasions, the city has suggested that we consider leasing a commercially zoned space for our business, but this simply isn't financially feasible given the part-time nature of our operations. We believe this expectation is unfair and an unsustainable option for small businesses like us. We're concerned that we may need to relocate yet again to an area with fewer home occupation regulations. We appreciate the opportunity to share our story, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. I'll hold questions until later. again. Next, we have Andrew Weens on behalf of Opportunity Solutions Project. Mr. Weens, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andrew Weens with Opportunity Solutions Project. I will be brief. I know we're running out of time. Pleased to speak in support of House Bill 2343 today. As mentioned by other conferees, small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and a lot of them begin at home, around the kitchen table, maybe in a garage, or from an apartment living room. Statistics show that nationally, roughly half of all businesses start at home, and a lot of them operate entirely online with just a couple employees. But in Kansas, entrepreneurs face an inconsistent patchwork of local regulations that make starting and running a home business unpredictable and in some cases impossible. We believe this bill basically establishes a new set of regulations kind of within the Venn diagram of home-based businesses around the state. You have now, if this bill passes, a subset of no-impact home-based businesses. And as the previous conferees stated, we believe that these home-based, no-impact home-based businesses are not something that's bothering anyone, and they shouldn't be regulated out of existence. The bill still establishes that local governments can have narrowly tailored regulations for public health and safety, compliance with state or federal laws, or payment of applicable taxes. So with that, we just, again, reiterate, entrepreneurs shouldn't have to ask permission from the government just to work inside their own homes and make a living. So we would ask for your support of House Bill 2343 and happy to stand for questions. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
The next conferee would be Eric Stafford. Here? Yes, there he is. Eric, we have about 2 minutes.
I can take less than that, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber of Commerce in support of House Bill 2343. Appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of this bill, highlighting what everybody else has said. Really, not every business starts as a large business, and we hope that every small business that starts in Kansas can grow into a large business. But there are times when regulations can be prohibitive and get in the way and cause problems. You just heard one example. How many more are there out there? But we do feel like this is restricted in scope enough that it's not overly broad. I know that Representative Turk has worked with local units of government to try to address a lot of their concerns over on the House side over the last couple of years. So we feel like we have a good product here today and would appreciate your support. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Committee, we are out of time, so we're going to continue this hearing on HB 2343 tomorrow. And we do have other work to do on tomorrow. So with that, we are in recess until tomorrow.